Welcome to this Deep Ties, everyone. Get ready to journey back to ancient Greece, because we're taking on 300.
Oh, yeah, this one's a classic. Blood, sandals, and more abs than you can shake a spear at.
Huh, exactly.
Right.
And we're going to break down why this movie, even with all the historical, let's call it creative liberty,
Yeah,
still gets people talking.
for sure. Whether you're a history buff or just love a good action flick, there's something here to grab you.
Absolutely. First things first, though, can we talk about the visuals? I mean, this movie is a feast for the eyes,
It's like someone said, let's make ancient Greece look like a moving comic book.
and they totally pulled it off. That
Yeah.
color palette, all those sepia tones, it's like watching a faded photograph come to life.
And the special effects, you gotta remember, this was 2006. Snyder pushed the boundaries of what was possible.
Totally. Every single frame is packed with detail. You can practically feel the weight of that Spartan armor.
Right. And speaking of Spartan armor, or lack thereof, those guys are ripped. Like sculpted by the gods, ripped.
It's a little intense, isn't it?
Oh.
You almost wonder if they had digital help with those physiques.
Oh, for sure. There was some digital enhancement going on. But hey, it's all part of the style. And speaking of style, we got to talk about the slow motion.
Oh, the slow motion, it's everywhere.
Especially during those fight scenes, you see every swing of the sword, every drop of blood in agonizing detail.
It's brutal, but effective.
hmm
Though I do wonder if it's a bit much sometimes. Like, do we really need to see that much slow motion gore?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? Is it style over substance? Or does it actually enhance the storytelling?
It's a fine line for sure. And speaking of walking that fine line, let's talk about Gerard Butler as King Leonidas. What a performance.
Talk about commanding presence. He is Leonidas through and through. That gruff voice, the unwavering stare.
And that line, "This is Sparta?" Come on, you know you've quoted it at least once in your life.
Who hasn't? It's pure cinematic gold. And it speaks to Leonidas' character. He's all about Sparta, its laws, its people. His entire being is dedicated to his kingdom.
Totally. But here's where the movie gets interesting. It doesn't shy away from the harsher aspects of Spartan life.
Yeah, it's not all sunshine and glory, is it? We see the brutal training these warriors endured from childhood.
The emphasis on strength above all else, even if it meant abandoning infants deemed too weak, harsh.
It really makes you think, right? Like, this is the society that produced these legendary warriors. It definitely complicates our perception of them.
It does. Okay, so on one hand, we have the Spartans
Hmm.
with their discipline and their, well, let's face it, their extreme lifestyle. And then on the other,
We have Xerxes and the Persians. Talk about a visual contrast.
right, Xerxes is like this larger-than-life, almost mythical figure, dripping in gold, surrounded by opulence.
He's like a god king who's descended from Mount Olympus just to mess with the Greeks.
It's an interesting choice, visually speaking, and it really highlights the differences between these two cultures.
Yeah, you've got the Spartans, all about austerity and discipline, and then the Persians with their extravagance and, well, their more flamboyant approach to warfare.
To say the least. I mean, war elephants, sorcerers throwing what looked like dynamite. And don't even get me started on the immortals.
Straight out of a nightmare, those guys. But again, it's all about creating that visual spectacle.
True. But let's be real, this portrayal of Xerxes and his army is, let's just say, it's not exactly historically accurate.
Not even close. But it's effective, right? I mean, you put these disciplined Spartan warriors up against this horde of seemingly supernatural beings.
You instantly create that David versus Goliath dynamic, and that's 300 in a nutshell.
And you can't help but root for the underdog, right? Even though you kind of know from the start how it's going to end.
Especially in this case, because they know they're marching to their deaths. Those 300 Spartans are going up against impossible odds.
It's more than just a battle for them, though. It's a statement.
Right, it's about buying time for the rest of Greece to get ready for the Persian army, sacrificing themselves to protect their homeland.
And that last stand, the way it's filmed, just beautiful. Tragic, but beautiful.
It's definitely epic. All those slow motion shots of the Spartans fighting to the death, it's hard to look away, but it also makes you think, right?
Yeah, we're talking about glorifying violence here. It's a tricky thing.
It is. On the one hand, you have these incredible acts of bravery and self-sacrifice, but on the other, it's still war. It's still brutal and bloody.
It's a conversation starter, that's for sure. Makes you wonder how this movie would be received if it came out today.
No doubt. All right, so let's switch gears a bit and talk about historical accuracy, or should I say creative interpretation.
Yeah, 300 takes some liberties, to say the least. It's more like historical fantasy, really.
Exactly. I mean, it's based on a graphic novel, not a history textbook.
Which is totally fine. It's entertainment. But it's good to be aware of that going in.
Definitely. It's like the difference between watching a documentary and a historical drama. Both can be great, but they serve different purposes.
Right, and you have to appreciate each on its own terms. But going back to the Spartans for a sec.
Yeah, there's a lot more to them than meets the eye. They're not just mindless killing machines.
Even though they're pretty good at the killing part,
Mm.
but they're fighting for their homes, their families,
Their way of life. Everything they know is at stake.
and the way they face that threat with such unwavering unity. There's a powerful message there about loyalty, about brotherhood, about facing down any challenge, no matter how impossible it seems.
Absolutely. Though it's interesting how the movie shows the not-so-pretty side of Spartan culture, too.
Yeah, like how they train their boys to be warriors from such a young age, the harshness, the discipline.
And the whole abandoning babies who aren't strong enough thing, that was pretty intense.
Makes you wonder what kind of toll that took, even on the Spartans themselves. We see them as these legendary heroes, but
There's always another side to the story, right?
always. And speaking of another side, we've talked a lot about the Spartans, but what about the Persians? They're the bad guys here, but even they have their own perspective.
It's easy to forget that, caught up in the Spartan point of view. But the movie does give us glimpses of the Persian side.
Yeah, like the sheer size of their empire, the different cultures they brought together.
And Xerxes, as over-the-top as he is, he's not completely one-dimensional.
No, he's got his reasons. Ambition, a desire for power, sure. But still, it's a good reminder that history is complicated.
It's never as simple as good versus evil. And I think 300, even with its exaggerated style, it kind of plays with that idea.
For sure. It makes you question those categories, those easy labels we like to put on things.
Exactly. And it does it all within this visually stunning, hyper-stylized world that Snyder created.
Speaking of which, can we just take a moment to appreciate those visuals again?
They're unforgettable. I mean, you can't talk about 300 without talking about those visuals, those saturated colors, the slow motion.
Like a fever dream, but in a good way.
Exactly. It's so heightened, so over the top. It's like opera, but with more bloodshed.
Huh. That's a good way to put it. It's definitely not subtle. But I think that's part of what makes it work. It pulls you into this heightened reality where anything feels possible.
It does. And it's not just the visuals. The music plays a huge role in creating that immersive experience.
Oh, absolutely. That score is epic.
It's so good. You can practically hear those Spartan shields clashing just listening to it.
It's interesting, though, because it's not all bombast and grandeur. There are these really beautiful, almost mournful melodies woven in there, too.
Yeah, adds a layer of tragedy to the whole thing, which, let's face it, the story of 300 Spartans marching to their deaths, it's inherently tragic.
For sure. But there's also the sense of defiance, of going out on your own terms.
Which is kind of inspiring when you think about it. So we've covered a lot of ground here. The visuals, the characters, the historical context, or lack thereof.
Yeah, we can't forget about that.
But for you, what's the most compelling thing about 300? What sticks with you, even after all these years?
Honestly, it's the way it makes you feel. It's such a visceral experience, from the first frame to the last. You're right there on that battlefield with those Spartans.
You really feel it, don't you? The weight of what they're fighting for, the knowledge that they're doomed.
It's intense. And for me, that's what makes it stick with you. It's not just a popcorn flick, It makes you think about sacrifice, about courage, about what it means to fight for something you believe in.
Well said. And for anyone out there who hasn't seen 300, I think that's a good place to start.
Don't go in expecting a history lesson, that's for sure.
Yeah, throw historical accuracy out the window.
But if you're up for a wild ride, a visual and emotional roller coaster.
Then buckle up, because 300 is going to take you there.
And you just might learn a thing or two about ancient Greece, even if it's not exactly by the book.
Fair enough. And on that note, I think it's time for us to say goodbye to ancient Greece, at least for now.
Until next time.
Thanks for diving in with us, everyone. And remember, if you like what you've heard, leave us a rating, leave us a review.
And tell a friend about the show.
We'll be back soon with another deep dive into a different topic. Until then, stay curious out there.